Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust Local Group online talk. My name is Harriet and I work for the Trust. And this evening I am joined by Frank and Stuart from our Oadby Wigston Local Group and Pam Mynott. Before we get going, I just want to let you all know that if you could please pop any questions that you have during Pam's talk into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and then at the end of the talk, we will go through as many questions as we've got time for. And just quickly, we are really delighted to be able to offer these talks for free. But if you would like to give a donation to help us cover the costs of running these talks and also to help support our work for wildlife across Leicestershire and Rutland, please head to our website at www.lrwt.org.uk/donate. Donations are greatly appreciated. Okay, without further ado, let's get the evening going. So I shall now pass over to Frank.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's talk hosted by the Oadby Wigston Group. Our speaker tonight gave us our last but one talk before the virus. The virus stopped us meeting in our usual room. It was a fascinating insight into the lives of badgers, much of it illustrated with video from camera traps right here in Oadby. This time, Pam Mynott, who's Leicestershire and Rutland badger recorder and secretary of the Badger Group, is taking us a little further away to look at another largish mammal. Her title tonight is Beavers in Britain and Beyond. So, Pam.
Okay. Hope you can all see that okay.
Yes, we can, Pam. We can see that fine.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'd like to start just with a quick introduction, which to explain how I became interested in beavers. In 1994, my husband and I went for a holiday in Colorado in the Rockies, and we quickly found out that there were free presentations about various aspects of the wildlife in the campsites. And we signed on for the first one, which just happened to be about beavers. I was absolutely fascinated by what I learned. At the end of the talk, we were told that we could sign on for a walk to look at beaver signs the next day. And of course, that's exactly what I did. And I remember seeing all the signs of beavers and of great help to us. What struck me most was when the guide said that the path we were on had been moved 3 times due to flooding by beavers, which made me see that there were the downsides to beavers as well as them being nice, attractive animals. Anyway, we enjoyed our holiday that year so much that we returned the next year. We'd seen some wonderful sightings of beavers, I should say, and I'd learned quite a lot about them. I remember my first sighting of a beaver, as I thought, had me puzzled because the animal that came from the Beaver's Lodge where they live, was quite small. And of course, a few minutes later, when it was getting a bit darker, a large beaver came from the lodge and I realized it wasn't a beaver at all. Later I learned it was a muskrat, and they do share the Beaver's Lodge with them. When we came the second time, I think the highlight was one evening when we managed to do 2 beaver watches in one evening. On the way to the lake, which we visited before, I spotted another beaver area. So when the beavers on the lake we were used to had stopped doing their show, or so to speak, we moved to the second lot and again had a very interesting time. And then of course, we left Breckenridge and we went on a number of wildlife holidays, and just occasionally we found out that there was a beaver watch included. Of course, we're always very enthusiastic about this. The one that sticks most in my mind was one in Alaska, which was right at the end of the season, and it was quite cold there. And we found quite by accident a bench by the side of a lake with a big sign, Beavers, by the side of it. So we sat there, and sure enough, the beavers came out, and we had a wonderful watch. We watched the whole family cooperating and doing various jobs like dam building. But we got so cold, we stood up to leave, and the beavers who were at a distance immediately swam up to us as if to say, carry on, carry on. So we sat down again, and this happened several times, but in the end, the cold won, and we had to leave. I managed to watch mainly the North American beaver. I'll talk more about the differences later. But we have, I did go on a trip on my own without my husband to Lithuania, where we had a very good watch and saw the beavers in Lithuania who are Eurasian. Of course, we had some failures, one always does with wildlife, and one that sticks in my mind was when the beaver failed to emerge, and I always found myself covered with bites from mosquitoes. Our last watch was in 2019, just before the year before the virus struck. And it was at my daughter's behest. She lives in Canada, in a small town in Greater Vancouver. And that she told me that they got beavers right in the center of the town. They were truly urban beavers. And a lot of my slides you will see were taken of these urban beavers. And my husband spent that sort of day looking at the signs for beavers and went back in the evening and had the beaver watch, which I'll talk about later. But I'm going to go on now with some basic facts about beavers, most of which I think people will know, but it's just a sort of to refresh your memory. The first one you may not know about, yes, beavers are classified as mammals, but in the 16th century, the Roman Catholic Church stated that they were fish. This enabled beavers to be eaten during Lent. They are rodents, of course, and there's only one bigger rodent, and that's the capybara, which lives in South America. And strangely, both beavers and capybaras are semi-aquatic. The capybara is about actually twice the size of a beaver. It's quite a hefty animal. As herbivores, beavers' diet is completely based on plant matter. However, I did come across an advert from a wildlife removal firm in the USA. It's alleged that beavers invade ponds and eat all the fish. No doubt this was done to drum up extra work. Beavers are nocturnal, and of course this makes them very difficult to observe. But the best time to watch beavers is in the high summer, when the nights are short and the days are long. The beavers do have to come out in the daylight. They are native to the northern hemisphere. The only ones in the southern hemisphere have been introduced there illegally. And some of the beavers live extremely north, in the far north, but beavers do not hibernate. This is a slide showing two beaver skulls. And there are, in fact, it is now known, two distinct species of beavers. They're quite hard to distinguish, if not impossible, when you're actually watching them, because they are of similar appearance and they behave in just the same way as each other. They both, you can see, have got big incisors, and I'll talk more about those. The castor bit of the name refers to oil sacs that they have, castor oil sacs. Not castor oil, it's castoreum, I should say. And the castor fibre is the Eurasian beaver, which was once in our country and is still present in one or two places. Castor canadensis is sometimes known as a North American beaver, but in Canada, of course, you refer to it as a Canadian beaver. Now, beaver teeth, as I said, beavers are rodents, and they've got typical teeth for rodents. They've got big four incisors, 2 up, 2 down, so to speak, and they grow continuously. I read somewhere that if not worn down, which of course they do get worn down by beaver chewing beeves, they can grow to 4 feet. I don't think anyone's ever done that. I think the beaver would have been dead long before that. You can see that they've got a red coloration on the outside, and this is a coating of an iron compound related to iron oxide. But the inside of the incisors doesn't have this coating, so it actually wears down right to the dentine, and this leaves the edge as very, very sharp indeed. It's like a chisel and an ideal tool for chopping through wood. They have 1 molar and 3 premolars on each side. The molars all have very jagged surface, again, to help the beaver with chewing. So they've got 20 teeth in all. This is a photograph I took in Canada of a well-chewed feet stump. You can see the beavers actually had 2 goes at felling. It didn't manage the first time, so it's chosen a bit higher up where it was easier to get through. And this is one that I've photographed, where the beaver has had 2 efforts at felling the tree, or could be beavers, of course, and they still haven't managed to get through and fell the tree, but it is leaning at a precarious angle. The diet of beavers varies according to the season. In autumn, they eat a lot of bark, which is their favourite food at that time of the year, but they also have to chop down trees, which they use in winter as a means of food storage, and they can be stored underwater or sometimes above water near to where the beavers live. In the spring and summer, they have a much more varied diet. They eat grasses, many different wild flowers, including some which are regarded as invasive in Britain and indeed in Canada, like the Himalayan balsam and, and the Japanese knotweed. They eat water plants. They're particularly fond of water lilies. I've seen a lake where the beaver lodges in the middle, and radiate out from it are clear pathways where the beavers have chomped their way through the water lilies. They eat water plants, of course, other water plants, of course, leaves and green shoots. Of course, they have to be adapted for the fact that they spent so much time in water. Most of the adaptations are to keep the water out of various parts of their body. Their eyes have a clear membrane. It's a nictating membrane, or if you're a cat lover, it's a third eye. It's the same membrane that you can see flash down when a dipper goes underwater. And this, of course, keeps the water off the eyes of the beaver. They have an internal flap in their ears, again to keep water out, and they can constrict, they can narrow their nostrils. Finally, they've got a raised section at the back of the tongue that keeps the whole area there completely free of water. An interesting difference between us and beavers, one of many, of course, is that they have, excuse me, I have got rhinitis, which is causing this problem. Their epiglottis is a flap of membrane which is situated in the nose and keeps water out of their larynx and their trachea, the voice box, and the windpipe. We've got an epiglottis, but ours is actually at the back of our throat, not in our nose. And of course, everyone knows that beavers can close the lips between their teeth. And you have lots of cartoons of this ilk, but it does show that a beaver's got webbed hind feet, an unwebbed forefeet, and 2 big teeth coming over its lips. Looking at more protection for life in the water, the beaver in this photograph, which I took, can see quite clearly that 3 of its sense organs are situated right at the top of its head, well above water. This is a slide which I wish I'd taken. I think it's a lovely slide. It shows very clearly that the beaver has got a black tail, a bit dusty, of course, in this photograph, and it's made up of tiny scales and quite leathery. It's got very few hairs on it, so it is not at all well insulated. And it's got a surprising number of uses. As you've seen from the photograph, it's a useful prop and allows the beaver to sit on its two hind legs, and it's free to use its dexterous forepaws. It slaps its tail on water to give an alarm signal to other beavers. This is quite a dramatic event. I accidentally fired my flash when taking a photograph of a beaver, and it immediately slapped its tail on the water. There was a great shower of water. And my husband, who was taking a photograph at the same time, was a bit slower than me, and he just got the photograph of the spray. It uses its tail as a rudder when swimming to steer itself, but if it wants to swim very quickly, it can use the tail as a paddle. And above all, the tail provides a good store of fat for use in winter and generates heat. So perhaps that cartoon wasn't too wrong in seeing a fat tail. The tail has also got a large surface area and very little insulation, so it can release quite a quantity of excess heat in summer, rather like a car radiator. The beaver's front paws are not webbed, and they are used for when they want to manipulate things. They are very good gripping tools. The photograph of the beaver in water, it doesn't show, but they do have wiry outer coat and dense underfur. This gives them protection when they're going through thickets and brambles and thorns against being injured, and the dense underfur keeps them warm. The one that I mentioned before, called castoreum, is situated in two glands near the base of their tail. They rub this oil into their fur using their grooming claws. This is quite an unusual adaptation. The second claw on each of the hind foot is split slightly so that it acts rather like the teeth of a comb. And you can see from this photograph that the beaver has got droplets of water on its fur, and these have not managed to penetrate through it and wet it. And I put this on just to show you at the start of what I'm next going to do, which is Beaver's family life. And it's worthwhile trying to count the beavers in this picture. I make it 6, but you do have to count quite carefully. The two smallest beavers, which are on the bottom and on the right-hand side, are beaver kits. The beavers form very strong family bonds. They don't argue or bicker between themselves, and they have a hierarchy that is based on age. It consists of a breeding pair of adults who are monogamous and stay together all their lives until one of them dies. Subadults, now these are around 2 years old, and they eventually leave when they need to find a mate. And the very youngest member of the family are called kits, and these are cared for by the subadults as well as by their parents. They're born from late December to early February, which coincidentally is the time when young baby badgers are born. But when they come up, when they are born, and like badger cubs, they have got their eyes open and they can actually swim within the first day in the lodge. Eventually, they leave the safety of the lodge and go out onto the water. Beavers are territorial and protect their lodges from other beavers, and they mark out their territory and define it with piles of mud marked with their scent, again from the castor glands. And that's a baby beaver, and you can see how fluffy its coat is. So although it can swim quite early, it's quite some time before it can dive, because the coat makes it very buoyant. So when it's got its full adult plumage, it can dive like the other beavers. This is a beaver dam that photographed in America. You can see that we're looking at the bottom side of the dam on the left-hand side and the top side of the dam on the right-hand side. The top side of the dam is quite firmly fixed in place, but here it looks on this side, what you can see, it looks a bit random, but the beavers keep the holes appearing in the top side of the dam. They're not too bothered about the bottom side. And this is an urban beaver dam which I photographed in Canada, and they've built a dam across a small stream, the Suter Brook, and they do this in order to maintain lots of water to swim in, and it does manage the water levels as well. They built the dam by driving logs and branches into the mud of the stream bed, and this forms a base. And they finish off, they add vegetation, mud and stones to finish the dam. Now this is a photograph I took of the other side of the dam. We can see there's quite a lot of water pouring out a pipe. This pipe is part of a beaver deceiver. A lot of people, of course, don't want the dam flooding too far to the sides, and this is it's especially true in an area like this one where there's a footpath quite close by. So they have installed, or about to install, I think in this case, a beaver deceiver. On the top side of the dam, there should be an inlet pipe, which is arranged at a height so that above that level, the water all goes, at least a lot of the water goes through the overflow pipe, which we can see quite clearly on the right of the screen. And they, of course, have to have some sort of protection on the inlet pipe. And they put a wire cage, a very, very strong wire, to stop the beaver interfering in any way or getting into the cage, and where they could well get stuck. And I say that these devices are known as beaver deceivers. The beavers react to running water by not plugging the area where the water's coming from. In this case, it's a low side of the dam, but they go always for the upper side. That's the most important side, and that's why they take a lot of care in maintaining it, and the whole family joins in. This is the Beaver Lodge, which you can see that it is a bit of an untidy jumble of twigs and branches. I think it may be a disused one, or one that's not used much. And there will be 2 underground entrances to it. Of course, the lodges provide the beavers with shelter. It gets very, very cold in some areas in winter, and it stops predators from getting at them. They're built from the same sort of materials as the dams were: mud, branches, trees and other vegetation, but no stones. Lodges are often some distance from the shoreline, and they're very visible. But they can be built by a stream by digging into the tunnels, into the bank of the stream, many tunnels. I'll say that again, I've got that wrong. If they are built by a stream, beavers dig tunnels that extend into the banks of the stream. Most lodges have 2 entrances, and they are underwater and allow the animals to enter and leave their lodge very safely. The living quarters, where the beavers want to be dry, are right at the top of the lodge, above the waterline. And as mentioned before, trees and branches for winter food are stored near the lodge. Another beaver lodge. I might have shown that twice. Now, this is a different type of beaver lodge. This is the beaver lodge that's built into a bank. You can see there's not so much of it to see. It's only, looks like half a lodge, but the rest of it is inside the bank in the tunnels. Now, this is quite an interesting slide to me. The arrow on the left indicates a fence round an enclosure for the city's vehicles, things like the dust carts. They don't call them dust carts, are stored there. So you can see just how near the beavers are living to humans. And there's also a railway line there with where the big, very long Canadian train trucks up and blows its horn consistently for quite a distance. I was standing on the bottom side of this slide, so to speak, watching the beavers, and I saw a beaver swim. It came up towards me, but it turned and went towards the bank. You can see there that there's a tree with a tree guard around it. I'll say more about that later. And the beaver I expected and hoped to see climbing up the bank, and I've got my camera at the ready. However, the beaver just disappeared. And I realized for the first time that that untidy pile of branches, twigs, logs, goodness knows what, actually comprised a beaver lodge. And they're going on now to signs of beavers, and they do make quite visible paths. And they also make slides down the banks of the waterside, where they actually slide down their logs and branches into the water. I've never seen a canal, and this beaver's out actually in good light, so it must be midsummer. But they make these canals in order to reach other stretches of water, which gives them access to other food stock and other trees and flowers and goodness knows what. Of course, trying to move big logs on trees is difficult, but doing it by water is much easier than doing it on land, as of course the water supports the weight of these items. And it also decreases the chance of them being killed by predators, because they're quite slow when they're on land. And they do have, in some countries, quite a lot of predators. And canals also increase both flora and fauna. The riverside herbs grow along the canal banks, and other animals such as water voles and water rats will use the canals. Well, beavers, like humans, can have a great impact on the landscape, and they're very good at improving the diversity of an area, which we are not. By building dams, of course, they create extensive wetland areas which benefit many species, such as fish. Obviously, there's more room for the fish to swim around, and the water quality is better. Birds, and I'll show you a slide that shows what birds do. Other mammals we've already mentioned, and plants grow in abundance in areas where their beavers have been. When water is stored by a beaver dam, it actually keeps the water levels fairly steady, because it's a big area and it takes a lot of water to raise its level. Flowing the slower of rivers and streams also helps to make the water of better quality. It means that it takes a lot of time to actually make it undrinkable, I suppose, and it takes time for all the debris to sink to the bottom of the water, and loses quite a lot of its noxious elements when this happens. And also, if the stream or river is flowing slowly, it can't scour the bottom of the river and send up noxious and harmful sediments. The lodges also, as I mentioned, benefit other animals, particularly in America, the muskrat, but other animals can shelter near it, and also birds use the dam quite a lot. The lodges also give benefit. Beavers benefit flora by felling trees and opening up space in close woodland where there's not much space between trees, and then it means that the flowers and other herbs can grow in the sunlit areas. And deer, of course, can very easily eat vegetation. When a tree is lying on the ground, it doesn't have to stretch up to try and get at leaves, and be unable in some cases to eat any of the leaves. Well, this was a photograph in America, and shows a American robin, which is actually much, much bigger than our robin. So it's not quite to scale. And it's on top of what I said is a beaver lodge, but it could also be a beaver dam. I'm not sure which. And if you look very closely, you can just about make out that the robin's got a twig in its mouth. So, of course, they can use the lodge for nesting material, and some of them actually nest right on top of the lodge, which gives them a very good view of what's going on, and they can avoid predators that way. But beavers do cause damage. The burrows are particularly harmful when they undermine banks of rivers and streams and cause them to collapse, and especially dangerous if they tunnel into a flood bank. They themselves can cause flooding because they raise the water level in the dammed upside of the dam area, and this can get on and damage crops. And of course, beavers can fell quite large trees, which may be have been planted for the way they look. They eat bark, and often ringbark trees. Now, I went on a failed beaver watch in Switzerland, where we walked down an avenue of black poplar, and every one of these wonderful trees had been ringbarked by beavers, which is a bit of a shame. And fishermen are particularly worried about beaver dams, and the ones in Canada were, because they think it could well make it difficult for salmon and other fish to swim upstream to spawn. In Canada, they'd spent a lot of time reintroducing chub salmon into their stream, and they didn't like the idea of it not being able to get up to spawn. But in fact, spawn takes place at the top of the stream river, so that only the most fit fish and strong fish can actually make it. And there are also problems in some parts of the USA and Canada where people have big grounds around their houses, because of course they can get in there and fell all the trees. And if anyone is lucky enough or unlucky enough to have a lake, and they don't use their residence over winter, but come in the spring, they have been known to find that there's a beaver lodge in their lake. Now this shows two trees and the damage that beavers can do in Canada, or have done in Canada. The tree on the left, the tree guard is still in place and it's doing its job, protecting the tree. But if you look at the one on right, you can see an area where the beaver has clearly taken off the bark. And it's done this by actually pushing the tree guard, which must have been loose, up. And this is another mixture, actually. A beaver's felled a tree. You can see the teeth mark on the stump, but it's in an area which the beavers will have helped, probably a wetland where there's a wide range of flowers. The beavers were once native to Britain, and Jack Riggle at our last meeting of the recorders yesterday asked him what signs there were of beavers in Britain. And I think somebody else pointed out that they were in Britain for quite a long time. And there was archaeological evidence, but there's also evidence that they have been in England by the fact, or Britain, by the fact that there are place names named after beavers. Beverley is one which comes to mind. and stands for beaver fields or meadows. And of course, there's a surname Beaverbrook. Unfortunately, beavers were hunted in Britain for food and fur and oil. The food, of course, was the beaver tails, the fur for beaver coats and hats. And I mentioned the oil before, but it is also used in scents to give a musky smell. And the beaver was thought to be extinct by the 16th century, though there are a couple of references going on to the 18th century of beavers. Whether they are true or not, we don't know. But by the end of the 19th century, Eurasian beavers were almost wiped out from the rest of Europe. Since then, the population in mainland Europe has slowly recovered due to introductions. A lot of it was done so that they could still have a source of fur. They introduced beavers, and some of it was done through altruism. Eventually, the EU made it a law that European countries should try to introduce species that were native to their country but have gone extinct. Britain has actually been slow to introduce beavers back. Excuse me. But there are now 2 large colonies living in the wild. Their source is unknown. They could have been released deliberately, or they could have been an accidental release from a wildlife park or zoo. Further beavers have been released to be watched and see how they behave in large fenced areas. Oh, this is quite an old map, dates from 2015. If you look on the left-hand side at Britain, you can see that there are 3 reddish spots on it. The one right at the bottom is the River Otter, where there's beavers are living. The one higher up, still on the left-hand side, is Knapdale, which is on the west coast. And on the right, we've got Tayside. The red coloration marks where the Eurasian beavers are living. And you can see that now there are quite big populations dotted across, not dotted, but filling a lot of Europe. The green coloration shows where there have been Canadian, or still are Canadian beavers living. These were introduced by accident before they knew, before they realised there were 2 distinct species. They weren't an accidental release, they were released, I think, to be hunted mainly. And where you've got a mixture of red and green, which you've got on the borders between Finland and Russia, you can see here, you've got a mixed population of both the Canadian beaver and the Eurasian beaver. And the Russians actually have tried to breed between the 2, but they are separate species, and the Russians met with no success. Just one beaver was born, and it was born stillborn. Now on to wild beavers in England. In 2013, a film was made of 3 beavers on the River Otter in Devon. It was not known where the beavers had come from, and DEFRA, the Department of Environment and Food and Rural Affairs, announced that the animals would be captured and tested. If free of disease and Eurasian beavers, they will be rehomed elsewhere. And he didn't say where, presumably in a zoo or a wildlife park. The Devon Wildlife Trust were very much opposed to moving the beavers and suggested a 5-year trial followed by a report. The beavers were indeed shown to be free of disease and to be Eurasian beavers, so there was no reason really why they shouldn't stay. But it was decided in 2016 and again in 2019 that more beavers were needed to improve the genetic diversity. You don't want all the beavers coming from the same source. The report was issued by the Trust in 2019, and it showed that the benefits of beavers outweighed any problems. People in general very much wanted the beavers to stay, and a surprising number of farmers who have suffered most from the beavers wanted them to stay as well. So it was agreed that they could stay. And that's a very pleasant picture of an adult beaver with 2 kits. There are 2 main colonies of beavers in Scotland. One is at Tayside, which is in the east of Scotland, and they don't know where these originated from. But the numbers of beavers in Tayside have gone up very much during the years. And in 2018, a survey showed the numbers were up to 420. Moreover, the beavers were spreading to other areas. One even got as far as Loch Lomond, but it was on its own, so it must have been a bit sad and lonely. The other colony is in Knapdale Forest, Argyll, near the west coast. The beavers came to a managed release into a fenced area that started in 2009. But in spite of other releases of Norwegian and Bavarian beavers to boost the numbers and to improve the genetic diversity, the number in Knapdale of beavers is very low. And there are only thought to be about 12 beavers there at the moment. So it says something that the beavers, I did what I was frightened I might do. The beavers do best really when they choose their own place to build their lodge and dams, and they are able to swim elsewhere when they've used up their resources. In May 2019, beavers became a protected species in Scotland, and a year later, in spite of that, they still carried the shooting of beavers, but it was done under license. 87 beavers were shot and 83 downs were removed. And that's some beavers going into Knapdale. Now, the first introduction of beavers into England was quite surprisingly a long time ago in Kent in 2001, when Wildwood imported and quarantined beavers from Norway and Bavaria. They did this in order to manage Ham Fen, which is a Kent Wildlife Trust wetland nature reserve. The beavers are contained within quite a big area, 30 hectares, with 3.8 kilometres of perimeter fencing. And coming later, in June 2017, the Cornwall Beaver Project released a pair of beavers in Woodland Valley Farm near Laddock. And it is possible to book a walk to see these beavers, and they're saying on the internet that they have hopes that they'll be able to restart them after April the 12th this year. So keep an eye out on that if you want to see beavers. And in November 2020, the Cheshire Wildlife Trust have introduced a pair of beavers at Hatchmere Lake as part of a 5-year project. The Trust are wanting to monitor the changes the beavers make, check the quality of water and the effect on wildlife. And that doesn't look like a beaver on the right, but it is in fact a beaver, and they do have quite a variety of colours. And a pair of Scottish beavers was released into a site in Dorset. The project is hosted by the Dorset Wildlife Trust, working with Exeter University and Wessex Water. The release site is enclosed by quite a specialist fence. It can measure the data recording the impact on water quality and on flooding. So we'll be interested to read these results. And the Wildlife Trust have announced that they're intending to release a record number of beavers this year. They hope to introduce about 20 beavers in all, including one for a project in North Wales. Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight will hopefully have beavers in their county for the first time. But I'm particularly, of course, interested in Nottinghamshire, which is the nearest to us. They intend to introduce beavers, at least 4 of them, into the spectacular Idle Valley Nature Reserve. Perhaps one day we might see beavers in Rutland Water. I'm told that it's ideal habitat for beavers. And this is my final slide, which is in farewell to an Urban Beaver Kit in Port Moody. As I said, my husband and I watched these beavers and had a wonderful time. At one stage we separated because it was quite crowded with trees and bushes, and I moved to an area where I could see across to the other bank. My husband was actually standing on a bridge and had acquired quite a gang of Canadians who were watching with him. They didn't know what the animal was and asked if it was an otter. What I saw was a young beaver, and I saw and heard a young beaver. Somehow it got separated from its parents and was crying quite piteously. And what I've not been told in any of the books is that a beaver cry from a baby is exactly like a human baby, and it really sort of tugged at my heartstrings. And of course I didn't know then that this was going to be my last beaver watch for quite some time. But I live in hopes that we'll be able to go back to Port Moody and perhaps to other places and see beavers again. That is the end. Thank you.
Well, yes, here I am. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Surprise, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Pam. Yes, that was most interesting. I see you've got some questions that have come in. Let's see, if I look on the Q&A. Jean Pascal. Where can we see beavers in the UK? You've mentioned those places, haven't you?
Yes, I have. I mean, I think it's a good idea perhaps to go on a managed walk, you know, to see beavers in an area where they have actually got beavers in quite a small area. There are a lot of beavers, of course, on the River Otter in Devon, but they are quite free to swim up and down, so you don't know necessarily where they're going to be. But if you ask around in pubs and hotels, if we're allowed to go into them, of course, and when we're allowed to go into them, they probably have a good idea, because the beavers help to bring in trade for them.
Yes, yes. Okay. Oh, it's just flipped up. How Gordon and Vivian ask, how do they dig out their tunnels and canals?
Well, they've got to use their forepaws.
Yes. Because
their back legs have got webs on. And I don't know how they do it. I imagine, I'm going to use the badger as an analogy here, that they probably scrape in with their forepaws and push the soil they've excavated behind, through their hind legs. I don't see that there's any other way to do it.
Yes,
probably press against the common walls, you know, to make them firm. Just wait for it, I'm afraid.
They'll be quite different animals from badgers, aren't they? Although they're both quite large and short legs and so on, but they're very different groups of mammals, aren't they?
Absolutely, and of course the beaver is quite a surprisingly big animal, actually. They can weigh up to 30 kilograms, so they are quite a hefty animal, much bigger than the average badger. Yes.
Let's see. Deborah Knott says, fascinating talk. Ask about water quality. Will it be checked prior to release to ensure their health? Do you know that?
Well, it will be checked prior to release, and it's going to be checked afterwards to see if they're actually improving the water quality.
Yes.
because that's one of the main advantages of beavers.
So it has to be to.
Sorry, if it's a managed release, then obviously you have to do that yourself. But I guess that the beavers, when they're in the wild, can choose an area where the water quality is good, as long as also sort of producing a lot of food that they want.
Yeah. Sean Comley asks, what's a predator for beavers? I don't suppose there are any in this country.
No, I think that there are in the US and Canada. There are things like coyotes. There are, even wolves, of course.
Yes.
And some of their birds of prey, might well take a young beaver, not size adults, but you can imagine that this happening.
Isn't interesting? Oh, sorry.
Another predator, of course, is man or mankind.
Yeah.
Because they're still shocked in a lot of countries.
Yes. When they build a dam, how much water level, how much water level change is it between the top and bottom that they achieve?
I really don't know. It'll depend on how much water's coming in, isn't it?
Yes. I suppose they're always leaky.
Yeah, as I say, it does leak, but they do work very hard. The whole family helps if there's a substantial leak in the dam, but they always, of course, go for the leak on the top side of the dam, not on the bottom side. So they are deceived by beaver deceivers. And there was also a Scandinavian teacher who had beavers that he'd rescued when the local water authority were continually changing the water level. The beavers kept getting stranded, above water, or then flooded out below water. And he got his children to build a beaver dam. And they must have had a very big receptacle. And he provided the material for the beavers. And he tried it with a leak, at the top of the dam and on the top side of the dam. And they went immediately and slapped, things on it to try and stop it leaking, and succeeded. But when he actually made a hole on the lower side of the dam, they still kept on putting it on the top, all the twigs and mud and what have you on the top side of the dam. So that was replicating what was actually going to be a way of deceiving the beavers that we're using now. But this fairly unknown Scandinavian teacher did it with his pupils in school.
Yes.
Quite a wonderful tale, I think.
I remember doing that as a kid, making dams on a stream, and you had to block it on the incoming side, because if you put things on the other side, they just washed away.
Yes, that's quite true.
Now Kelly asks, how did they come to be licensed to be shot after they were given protected status in Scotland?
Well, it was damage that they were doing to farmland and protests by farmers. They were flooding their fields, you see, and doing damage to crops. And I suppose it's cheaper, rather than paying the farmers compensation for what's been lost, is to allow them to manage the beavers themselves. And they had actually been doing this for years, before this bill came in. They had been shooting beavers that were damaging their land. And of course, they in a way, it's a sort of two-edged sword, because if they get rid of the beavers, then they damage the water quality that runoff from farmland causes, makes the water quality worse, and the beavers are not there to rectify that. And of course, you do see an awful lot of damage to to the edges of banks when cattle poach, and stomp around and make a terrible mess.
Yeah. I suppose this might be a sort of related question in a way. Are there any trees which the beavers never eat? Asks Paula Cargill.
There's quite a list of trees that beavers do eat, and I'm sure there are ones they don't eat. The very, very hardwood trees must be really difficult to fell, and there are some really hardwood trees about. I mean, they go for they go for birch, alder, aspen, poplars, things like that. Whether it's because they're easy to chew or whether they like the flavour of them, I don't know. But those are, it's about 8 or 9 of their preferred trees that they will eat. And of course, if they're kept in an enclosed area, there's a problem of what happens when they have felled all the trees. I really don't know how people are going to cope. They can't keep the beavers for very long. They can soon sort of remove all the trees. Obviously there'll be regrowth, but they'll eat them as saplings.
Male and females.
Oh, right, yes. I've just heard a question from my wife Eleanor here. She's just asked, do the males and females sort of cooperate equally in making the dams and lodges and doing all that work?
Yes, not just the male and females, it's the whole family.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the kids can't do very much when they're very young, but they just accept it that it's a vital part of their life, and they have to work as a team. So yes, they do cooperate. I mean, I don't know if there's any difference in size between the male and the female beavers. I suspect the males are heavier, but that's not always the case.
You okay to go on? There's still a few questions there.
How about that? Yes, it's all right by me.
Yes.
Sorry to agree.
Okay. Now, a couple relating to introductions. Jean Pascal asks, the National Trust were planning to reintroduce beavers to the Honiton estate? Do you know if that's happened? And also, what about Derbyshire at Willington?
I mean, certainly the Wildlife Trust are doing releases in Derbyshire. There's no doubt about that. I looked at the Wildlife Trust website, and of course, I've got to rely on people's websites for a lot of information.
Yes.
They said the National Trust said they were in favour of beaver reintroduction and were looking into it. And that's all I could see, and that perhaps reintroductions were planned. I might have missed the Honiton one, but they didn't give any detail. Excuse me again. And that's understandable, because at the moment it's very difficult to plan, what you're going to do, because there's a lot of work will have to go into a release beforehand.
Yeah. Making
sure you've got the right sort of trees there. Making sure that the perimeter is secure, and but to say what will happen when the beavers have actually eaten all the vegetation, I don't know.
Yes.
I certainly know about somebody who owned a sort of semi-stately home and had a sort of little zoo almost, and had a lot of British mammals and others in it, and he had beavers, and quite a big number of beavers in quite a big area, and they had a very steady flow of people coming to watch the beavers, but eventually they simply ate their way out of it. They couldn't be kept there any longer. I don't know what happened to them, but he said after all the effort and work they put in, they had to realise that they couldn't carry on with the beavers. They just weren't anywhere where they could get enough food.
Charlie Bird asks, is there taste for invasive species like Japanese knotweed and Himalayan balsam a driving point for reintroduction?
I don't know that it is at all. I do know that they're very anti-Himalayan birds in Canada, so they must quite like the idea of the beavers eating them. And of course, they don't have to reintroduce them there. They are, to a large extent, reintroducing themselves. The beavers we were watching, I think, had originally come from another bit of the urban centre of Port Moody, and they had caused problems because they blocked what was meant to be an overflow pipe for heavy storms, which they get from time to time, being on the west coast, and they had to sort of act. The local ecologists had to act to do something, and I suspect that they actually moved those beavers from that area just across the road to where we saw them. So, reintroductions can be managed, but the beavers left to live live. But certainly a lot of people that lived in the flats were very upset when they lost their beavers and could no longer stand on the bridge and watch them. And there were a lot of letters written to the local councillor. So there was a tremendous pressure at that time.
Paula Cargill, another question from her. Are any employed, I suppose she means deliberately employed, for the purpose of flood prevention for new or existing housing development areas?
I shouldn't think so in Britain. I don't know whether it's done in elsewhere.
Oh,
We have a tendency to build in floodplains, but a lot of countries have got so much land compared with Britain, which is densely populated, and they don't have to build on flood areas. But whether it will be done in Britain, I mean, if you're losing land to build houses, you're not going to have much left for beavers, are you, or much habitat for them? It's quite an interesting idea, though.
yes. I've just noticed that there's a message there, I think, saying that Harriet would like to answer that question. Is that right, Harriet?
No.
Oh, it says under it, LRWT Trust would like to answer this question live.
Oh,
No?
it's just so that we can. I'm clicking through them as you are asking them.
Yeah. Oh, right. Oh, here's another one from Paula. Is there a big temperature difference from inside and outside the lodge? How warm and cosy is it in there?
I should think in winter there is a difference, but it's not that. It can't be that well ventilated, except at the top, because they've got to keep the water out to a certain extent. But I haven't actually. I'd have to sort of get on the internet, or tinternet as people say, and find that one out. I'm not sure at all, but presumably they're reasonably well insulated. But they can have very severe winters in places like Norway and Sweden, places like that where there are beavers. But the beavers have got carrying their own insulation as well. They can release excess heat in summer, of course, as I've explained. So that must affect their surroundings.
What's that? Oh, yes. Deborah Knott asks about the reproductive cycle. I think you mentioned it was December to February they have their kits.
They can't. They don't know what the gestation period is. They think it's about 3 months, but that's just a guess because no one apparently has ever seen a pair of wild beavers copulating, and even if they had seen them, you wouldn't know who's the kits, whether the kits you saw were actually belonged to that pair of beavers or somebody else's beavers. People don't go around marking beavers in quite the way. You sort of mark birds, don't you? And you can read rings on toes and things like rings on legs and things. But as I say, they get, most people seem to think about 3 months for gestation, but I have seen that somebody thinks he's read the literature quite heavily and found 1 or 2 genuine guessworks, so to speak, and he's plumped for 4 months. It's the same, a lot of the things about beavers, like their weight and that, it's really guesswork, unless you've got, of course, captive beavers that you can weigh. I suppose you could, in an enclosed areas, if they do have kits, you could perhaps work out, if you did see the male and the female copulating, you might be able to, you know, to answer that question better than I'm doing.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, they're not animals that you can observe in a tame sort of environment, really, are they?
Well, they're also nocturnal, of course.
Yes.
So you'd have to be prepared to sit up overnight in the hope of catching a pair of beavers at it, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, if they're doing that inside a lodge or something, you're not going to see very much.
No. I suppose actually we do have a lot of cameras now that we can use. I bet there are other ways of doing it. I suppose you'd put your camera inside your lodge, but then you'd have to, if it was underwater. I mean, I don't know, you know, if they copulate underwater or on the water or what. Probably not. You'd have to have waterproof cameras installed.
Well, perhaps make this the last question. Susan Sutton asks, nature put beavers on Earth, so shouldn't we learn to make the environment work for them? If they can't survive, we're getting it wrong.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I think the Indians have a proverb that, you know, when all the animals have gone, the humankind will die through loneliness. And I think there's something in that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, Pam, for a really stimulating talk and pictures. It's brought up a whole range of questions, and I'm sure there's ones that I've probably missed as well. So yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Shall I hand over to you, Harriet, for winding up, or any last minute? Yeah.
Just to add what Frank said, thank you so much, Pam, for joining us. Really, really interesting talk. I've definitely learned a lot about beavers that I didn't know before, so I found that was so interesting, and some really lovely photos as well to see there. So we're getting some nice comments coming in to say thank you and how informative it was and how much people enjoyed it. So I think it's been very well received and a really great evening. So thank you so much, Pam, and thank you, Frank, and the rest of the Oadby and Wigston group for organising this evening, and thank you everyone for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your weekends, and hopefully we'll see you at our next talk. I can't remember what we've got coming up next, but please head to our website. I know we've got one next week. I can't remember now off the top of my head what the subject is, but we've got one coming up next week, and we've got talks for the rest of the summer, so please just head to our website to check what talks we've got coming up. And yeah, thank you again, everybody, and we'll see you all soon.